The IDF continues the ground operation in the Gaza Strip for the first time also in Deir al-Balah. And meanwhile, a pressure campaign on Hamas is being ramped up, and there is an assessment that it is possible to reach an agreement on the details of a deal to release the Israeli hostages and end this war. Meanwhile, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is claiming that Hamas is doing everything to sabotage the new mechanism for distributing food, while the United Nations is imposing constraints and refuses to move along certain routes. 3 distribution centers are operating in the south of the Gaza Strip, while the IDF claims that the aid is entering Gaza, but the United Nations refuses to distribute it. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host, Yair Pinto, reporting about all the truth from Israel. Qatar, Egypt, and the United States are applying extraordinary pressure on the Hamas terrorist organization to answer positively and as soon as possible to the last proposal sent to it. And there is hope that the pressure will work and the answer will come soon. In Israel, they say that the main dispute over the scope and the depth of the withdrawal of the IDF is solvable, but of course, there will need to be an answer also from the Hamas leader sitting in Doha, Qatar. Sadly, these Hamas leaders say that they're waiting for an answer from what's left of the Hamas leadership inside the Gaza Strip, and they're having problem making contact with them. And meanwhile, in light of criticism from a wide range of actors over the distribution of humanitarian aid in the Gaza Strip, the IDF claims there is no limit on truck entry to the Gaza Strip and that distribution is being stalled by the United Nations. The army also claims that Hamas is trying to disrupt it at any cost. The IDF insists there is no famine in Gaza and also claims that some of the pictures that are being circulated of supposed famine in the Gaza Strip are actually old photographs from Yemen and possibly other Middle East countries and conflict zones. The IDF insisted on Tuesday evening that, according to all signs, monitoring and daily checks conducted by the coordinator of government activities in the territories and the units in the Gaza Strip, there is no famine phenomenon in Gaza. This is in contrary to the flood of criticism against Israel in the past week that has come from several governments in Europe and even the White House. And meanwhile, on Israel's northern arena, the IDF has arrested illegal arms dealers in southern Syria who are attempting to set up terrorist infrastructure near the border. Various weapons were also seized and more investigations are underway. To Israel's south, the Houthis are not letting up, as the Israeli Air Force was compelled to intercept another ballistic missile launched from Yemen early Tuesday morning, and a second missile fell short on its way to Israel. On the Iranian front, United States President Donald Trump cited the Iranian foreign minister's admission regarding damage to his country's nuclear facilities in a demand that American media outlets cast doubts on his statements that the Iranian nuclear project had been obliterated completely. So, what did Iran's foreign minister say? Do you know? Well, he admitted that severe damage was caused by Israeli and American strikes, stopped uranium enrichment in Iran, but insisted that the process will continue. Interestingly, he also admitted the reason that Iran's regime wants to continue this activity, which has cost them so much time, money, and problems, declaring that we cannot give up. Enrichment is a source of national pride. I am reminded of a Bible passage which gives a list of things that God hates, and pride is the first thing on that list. Another Bible passage says that pride goes before destruction. I think that these guys in Iran should give some serious thoughts to this. In any case, President Trump responded to this statement by Iran's foreign minister by saying the nuclear facilities were destroyed, and if necessary, we will do it again. And at the same time, there are new talks that are being pursued between Tehran and the European powers over issues related to the 2015 JCPOA nuclear agreement, especially the possibility of new sanctions. But it's not just airstrikes and economic sanctions that are putting pressure on Iran's regime this week. President Pezeshkian made a dramatic statement on Tuesday regarding a brutal heat wave in the country, candidly admitting that there may be no solution. In the Iranian city of Sabkhara, the highest temperature in the world so far this year was recorded, 52.8 Celsius. The country is also dealing with a long-term drought, and together with this week's ferocious heat wave, Iran's regime is being forced to take drastic measures. We have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what's happening in Israel on day 656 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region that are taking their orders from Iran's Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. Before we begin, guys, just hit that subscribe button so that you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Now, let's get into the news, and we'll start this report Boots on the Ground style, straight from the Gaza Strip, where the IDF forces under the Southern Command continue to operate, guided by the military intelligence and the Shin Bet against the terrorist organizations throughout Gaza. This week, for the first time since the start of this war, a ground operation began in Deir al-Balah in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip. Division 36 forces are continuing the ground activity in the south of Gaza, going out on focused offensive missions in order to destroy terror infrastructure, eliminate terrorists, and deepen their operational achievement. On Monday night, the Kfir Brigade's battle team located and confiscated in Khan Yunis several fragmentation grenades, IEDs, mortar shells, and tactical communication devices. Elsewhere, Division 98 forces continue to operate in the Sajaiya area and the Zaytun area in Gaza City. Hundreds of precise strikes in support of the maneuvering forces were carried out. Terror infrastructures were destroyed, including observation posts, launch positions, weapons depots, and several underground routes. In addition, many dozens of terrorists were eliminated in that area. Likewise, Division 99 forces operating in Bet Hanun and in the center of the Strip continue operational activity to eliminate terrorists. And during the past 24 hours, the Air Force struck dozens of terror targets throughout the Gaza Strip. Among the targets that were struck in support of the ground forces, terrorists, booby-trapped buildings, anti-tank launch positions, combat tunnels, and additional terror infrastructure. And elsewhere on Monday, the IDF forces identified fire that was directed at them in the Deir al-Balah area and returned fire towards the area from which the shooting was identified. And prior to the start of the forces' activities in the area, the IDF warned the civilian population to evacuate that area for their safety, and also held discussions on this matter with the international organizations that are operating there. The IDF emphasizes that the forces are in continuous, ongoing contact with the international organizations, and throughout this war enable their teams to evacuate safely in coordination with the forces and subjected to the operational needs. These actions are done in coordination in order to allow essential institutions to be moved to alternative areas according to the needs raised by the organizations. As part of the IDF's forces' activities against the terror organizations in these areas, suspects are sometimes detained for questioning and for investigation. The IDF noted that after on-site questioning, most of these individuals are released and evacuated outside the area in coordination with the international organizations. It must be emphasized that suspects in the field are handled according to the international law. However, according to an IDF statement, at times, during on-site questioning, suspects in terror activity are required to remove part of their clothing temporarily so that a search can be conducted and to ensure that they are not hiding explosive belts or other weapons on them. The IDF will not refrain from operating in areas where terror activity is carried out that threatens Israel's security. and this is according to the IDF statement. Guys, here at TBN Israel, we will keep spreading the truth about these issues in Gaza, and we invite you to help us. Share this information with your friends, hit the subscribe button, and help us reach more people with what's happening in Israel, boots on the ground style. Now, I want to talk for a moment about a way that you can directly help the people of Israel who are facing intense, challenging times during this conflict. And I'm talking about security threats, economic boycotts, and uncertain futures. These times are more difficult than ever, and the burden on the Israeli people is very heavy. Now, more than ever, your support is urgently needed. TBN Israel has an ongoing campaign to help our viewers stand with Israel. With one-time gift or a monthly partnership, you can help us share the powerful stories of faith, resilience, and hope through our programs, through our live updates, and through our news coverage. Together, we can bring light and encouragement in these challenging days. So guys, if you want to stand with Israel and help our war here, visit www.tbn.org/standwithisrael. Again, that's tbn.org/standwithisrael, and make a difference in the land of Israel. Help us share the truth of what's going on in the Holy Land. Thank you so much. And now we're getting back into the news and staying on the topic of the Gaza Strip, but switching our focus to the negotiations over a deal to release the remaining hostages and bring this war to an end. In the midst of the sensitive negotiations for a hostage deal, the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip has become another arena of struggle between Israel and Hamas. It was reported on Tuesday that no famine is identified in the Gaza Strip, but action is required to stabilize the situation. One official clarified that it is not as simple as sending trucks loaded with food and other supplies into Gaza because, as the official said, flour is flour, but Hamas people understand who is transferring the aid. They seize it, sell it, and thus can recruit operatives and pay salaries. Hamas also tracked the entities that brought aid into the Gaza Strip and took over trucks and warehouses. So with all of that in mind, and in light of criticism from a wide range of actors over the distribution of humanitarian aid in Gaza, the IDF claims there is no limitation on the entry of trucks into the Gaza Strip, and the distribution is being installed by the United Nations. The army also claimed that Hamas is trying to disrupt it at any cost. Almost daily, one or more Palestinian recordings are distributed of crowds pushing their way to food distribution center, and of deterrent fire, sometimes lethal also, by the IDF towards them if they get too close. But the army claims that these distribution centers succeed in their main goal, which is keeping the critical mass of the aid and the food that Israel brings into the Gaza Strip out of Hamas's hands, and in a way that cannot be exploited by this terrorist organization to sustain and strengthen itself. However, about half of the food that enters into Gaza goes on trucks to the northern part of the Gaza Strip, and there the looting still occurs, unlike the four distribution centers in the center and the south of the Gaza Strip. The IDF explained that we know the caloric value and every truck that enters and how much population it suffices for. We speak with distribution workers on the ground with 8 organizations on the ground in Gaza, and we discover that Hamas is using pictures of hungry children from Yemen and also AI-generated images. The IDF also says there are diseases in the Gaza Strip, also amongst children, but not linked to the malnutrition. It is possible that there are accessible problems to food, and we need to expand the aid operations to solve them. This is according to the IDF. These IDF claims come amidst intense criticism, including a joint statement that is published this week by over 20 countries calling to end the war and allow the flow of aid to the Gaza Strip. The statement declares that the suffering of civilians in Gaza has reached new depths. The Israeli aid model is dangerous, fuels instability, and prevents Gazans from human dignity. This is according to the statement. This last part of the statement is astonishing to me, as it echoes a complaint made by the Hamas terrorist organization, that the Israeli distribution of aid harms the dignity of the Palestinian people. Do these governments which signed on these statements agree with Hamas? Do they think it's more dignified to allow Hamas to steal the United Nations humanitarian aid, the shipments, and all the goods, and sell it to these people at a massively inflated price and recruit them to become terrorists? It's important in this context to remember that from the day that Israel's political echelon approved the renewed entry of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip, the mechanism was changed to reduce Hamas's involvement. Hamas doesn't like that because they want to use the distribution of aid as a lever of control over Gaza's population, and it is very hard to imagine that these governments, to say nothing of the United Nations, are unaware of this. So why are they trying so hard to accommodate Hamas in this regard? Why are so many governments, NGOs, and media organizations trying so hard to promote the false narratives and the lies that Hamas is pushing in order to try and sabotage Israel's highly successful effort to bring humanitarian aid to the ordinary people of the Gaza Strip who unquestionably need it? Let me know what you guys think about all of this in the comments section. But first, consider that Foreign Minister Gideon Saar of Israel spoke earlier this week with the European Union's foreign ministers, Kaja Kallas. In the conversation, Saar said that Hamas is conducting a false campaign while deliberately creating frictions between the civilian populations in Gaza, the aid distribution centers, and the IDF, and that Hamas is the one that shoots at civilians and tortures them when they try to collect the aid. On the subject of negotiations aimed at releasing the remaining hostages and ending this war, he added that while Israel said yes to the agreement to release the hostages and to the ceasefire, Hamas is dragging its feet and sabotaging the negotiations while cruelly continuing to hold our hostages. The international community must not fall into Hamas's trap. The IDF issued another statement regarding this issue on Tuesday, insisting that the state of Israel is not limiting the number of humanitarian aid trucks to enter the Gaza Strip. 950 aid trucks entered the Gaza Strip through Kerem Shalom, which are supposed to suffice for 2.5 weeks, but the United Nations will not distribute the aid for its own reasons. And following Israeli pressure, the United Nations agreed to distribute to Gazan residents aid from only dozens of trucks. This situation exacerbates the problem in the Gaza Strip and creates a bottleneck that disrupts the course of the distribution of goods. And against the backdrop of the allegations of famine in Gaza, the IDF emphasizes that this is a false campaign by Hamas that is using it as a tool within the developing negotiations for a hostage deal. However, it was further claimed that Hamas has an interest in exacerbating the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, and does so by creating chaos at the distribution compounds and attacking civilians and the American aid vehicles. Once again, there is no mystery about any of this. The evidence that what the IDF is saying is true is literally out in plain sight for everyone to see. In conclusion, the IDF claimed that the fact that the terrorist organization is working to disrupt the GHF mechanism for distribution of aid and humanitarian supplies in Gaza is proof that it is harming it and is working against distribution of aid to the Gazan population. The mechanism, according to the IDF, harms Hamas's force buildup and therefore constitute an effective tool in this war against Hamas. Guys, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report all the truth about what's happening in the Gaza Strip, and as always, we ask you to help us by sharing our videos on YouTube, following us on social media, and above all, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already so that you'll never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Now, we're switching our focus to Israel's northern arena. Against the background of the tension on the border with Syria, the IDF continues proactive enforcement activity inside the Syrian side of the border in order to prevent the entrenchment of terror infrastructures that could endanger Israel. For instance, overnight between Monday and Tuesday, IDF forces arrested arms dealers in southern Syria. Soldiers from Division 210, together with the Unit 504 of the IDF's Intelligence Directorate, completed an operation in which several suspects were arrested and interrogated as arms dealers who operated in the southern parts of Syria in that area. Several weapons and stocks of ammunition were also seized during this operation, which was part of Israel's broader efforts to prevent Iran and Hezbollah from establishing a foothold in the Golan Heights in the northern parts of Israel in order to threaten the Jewish state. And in a related story, the United States envoy to Lebanon and to Syria, Tom Barak, was interviewed yesterday by the AP news agency about the clashes in Syria and Israel's intention and intervention on behalf of the Druze in Es-Soweda, and claimed that Israel prefers to see Syria fragmented and divided rather than a centralized and strong state. He also said in the interview that the United States supports the new government in Syria, which only took office in January of this year, and that there is no plan B for working with it to unite the country after many years of a bloody civil war. I'm surprised to hear that the United States representative said such a thing, and I believe that we'll be hearing a lot more about this story in the coming days. So guys, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development in Syria, and as always, we invite you to be part of the team, share and follow us. And now, we move to TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani, who will take us through the latest developments in our neighborhood, the Middle East. Mati, the American president decided this week that the United States will leave the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. A White House official said that the decision is because of anti-American and anti-Israeli policy. And President Trump, who already led the United States to withdraw from a series of international institutions, left UNESCO in this first term as well because of this attitude against Israel. Meanwhile, the Iranian foreign minister admitted that severe damage caused by Israel and American strikes stopped uranium enrichment in his country, but emphasizes that the process will continue, declaring that we cannot give up enrichment because it's a source of national pride. And Trump responded to this by saying the nuclear facilities were destroyed, and if necessary, we will do it once again. And meanwhile, the talks are being scheduled between Tehran and the European powers who are threatening Iran with new sanctions. So, Mati, what do these headlines mean, and what is really going on? Are we on the verge of a new round of kinetic hostilities with the Iranians?
Tonight, once again, the United States shakes the diplomatic world that we live in. It declares that it's planning to leave UNESCO. At the same time, Iran is experiencing unprecedented heat waves, and the hostage deal between Israel, Hamas, and the United States seems to be nearing a resolution. All of that is coming up in the next couple minutes. First of all, UNESCO. President Trump has previously already withdrawn from UNESCO, which is the UN's heritage and education entity. And he did this in the past for a very clear reason, because that agency promoted an anti-American, anti-Israeli, and anti-Semitic agenda, and they're doing so once more. In the past, one of the examples in the case studies that President Trump stated was the fact that they recognized Hebron, the city south of Jerusalem, as a UNESCO heritage site only for the Palestinian people, omitting one important fact, the fact that it is the cave or the tomb of the patriarchs of the Jewish nation. It is a site holy to the Jewish people and also has Jewish residents within it. They simply forgot, quote unquote, to mention that part of it. UNESCO's done the same, and I want to be clear here, so have multiple other UN agencies. People look at this and they criticize the US administration as weakening international entities. But in reality, if you really track what's been happening, you'll understand that very clearly, very decidedly, and very accurately, President Trump has been very spot on with his criticism of international entities, specifically as they relate to Israel. This last war in the Gaza Strip showed us what UNRWA, the agency that was supposed to help alleviate the Palestinian refugee problem, what it truly does. And what it did was fight alongside the Hamas terrorists, support terrorism, and hide terrorism infrastructure within its facilities. And that's not exclusive only to that organization. Many of these organizations are marred and they're touched by a bias against the US, Western thought, and democracy. And President Trump has been very, very clear in calling out that hypocrisy, defunding them, and pulling out the US from that. And he doesn't do it and leave a vacuum. The US has been very wise in creating alternative treaties to help rebuild rather than just bring destruction and a biased opinion. There's another issue that has to do with the UN and its agencies. And you need to understand this. As we stand in a diplomatic country that enjoys the liberties that we do, it's easy to forget that most of the countries of the world are non-democracies. Most of the countries of the world don't want to promote an agenda that aligns with the US agenda or the Israeli agenda, or if we're talking about it, the European agenda. And because of that, the UN is often used to promote agendas of the Russians, which are usually non-democratic, the Chinese, which are both anti-American and anti-Western in their agenda, and several other countries, many times Muslim or Arab countries, promote or hijack UN agencies to promote anti-Western thought. So Trump's criticism is spot on, and it is a refreshing change in the US foreign policy compared to what previous governments were attempting, which was more of a gentle push towards let's try to be a little more balanced. And really, when you're working with an agency like that, you can't just be balanced. You have to be honest about what they bring to the table. And that's exactly what President Trump has done. On a completely unrelated topic to the US, Iran is once again experiencing record heat waves. How hot? Pushing 50 degrees centigrade, which is almost 130. I think it's like 127 degrees Fahrenheit. Not only that, while they're experiencing these record temperatures, they're also experiencing water shortages and electricity cutouts. So the people of Tehran, the people of the big cities of Iran, are experiencing unprecedented heat waves. In fact, some of the highest temperatures recorded on Earth within urban areas that are not, somewhere deep in the desert. And they're doing so while they have a problem delivering electricity and problems delivering water. So much so that the Iranian government has called on a state of emergency and told people to stay at home and not go to work until the situation changes. And this shows you two things. One, how weak their economy is and how weak their infrastructure is. And two, well, I think there's like a biblical underlying message that happens here, but I'll leave you the ability to fill in the blanks. One more big thing here is that Foreign Minister of Iran, Araghchi, has several times admitted recently that Iran has taken a substantial hit from the combined Israel-US attacks. So much so that it says that the damage that was caused by them was dramatic and debilitating. Now, Iran is still not broken, but the series of attacks and the fact that they're publicly admitting them gives you an insider's look into what they're really thinking, what they're really feeling about what's been happening around them. The Iranian government is weakened. The Iranian government has taken a substantial hit. The Iranian government needs a break from the ongoing pressure to rebuild and to remove the sanctions. And I think that's really where we're going with this ongoing negotiation with the Iranians and the talks about them removing their nuclear program. So again, they're experiencing a lot of internal issues that in turn affect their external policies and ability to negotiate with the West, specifically the US and Israel. But even with all this internal pressure that Iran is experiencing, this same Foreign Minister, Araghchi, declared just a couple days ago that Iran reserves the right to continue enriching uranium and that the matter is a matter of national pride to the Iranian people. Now, why he says that? I mean, I think we need a deeper analysis of the Iranian people to really get that, but it shows you how adamant they are to continue enriching uranium. President Trump responds immediately and says, don't worry, if you continue doing that, we will once again strike within Iran. And that's really the tune that's been playing out again and again and again when it relates to Israel, Iran, and their attempts at a nuclear program. The US is putting maximum pressure diplomatically and on a military level, and the Iranians are experiencing an incredible amount of internal pressure, and all of them will bring them to the point where they have to negotiate away their nuclear program. I believe it's only a question of time. Really big news for the Israeli people is the fact that it looks like we're nearing a deal with Hamas. And the deal looks like this. With the help of the US, we're about to sign a 60-day ceasefire in which the Hamas terrorists will return 10 living hostages and 18 deceased or bodies of hostages to the Israeli people. Steve Witkoff, let's call it the special emissary for many, many different issues in the Middle East, he's the one that's bringing together this deal. And the rumor is he's on his way to the Middle East to help seal the deal completely. This is big news for Israel, big news for the US, and big news for the people of Gaza. Israel has been waiting for this moment and pushing for this moment on a very, very, very tight deadline, knowing full well that as the longer we prolong this negotiation, the longer we draw out the discussion, the worse the situation of the hostages will be. And that's exactly where we are right now. We're at a point where we must take action. There must be a deal that brings back a good number of the hostages, or most of the hostages, and ends this phase of the combat. If you look at what's been going on the Gaza Strip, the IDF has been moving as fast as it possibly can to try and seal the deal on this ongoing negotiation with Hamas. And what we're seeing right now seems to be the best news we've heard in a long time about the US bringing forward a deal that helps Israel and Hamas close this phase of the war and return as many hostages, both alive and dead, to the people of Israel where they truly belong. The main points to track on this negotiation are the fact that Hamas wants Israel to fully withdraw from the Gaza Strip, and Israel in turn is refusing to do that. The Israeli government wants to maintain control of at least some of the corridors within the Gaza Strip for understandable reasons. Hamas has shown that it can't be trusted, both in ceasefire and during warfare, and we want to make sure they don't go back to smuggling weapons and hiding hostages, which is what they've done exactly in the last year and a half of warfare. There's another big piece here, which is the US government's involvement. President Trump has said very clearly that time is running out for Hamas. And in fact, Hamas has been presented with this deal multiple times before. But there's a problem here. Their government is split between the military leadership within the Gaza Strip and let's call it their political leadership that resides mostly in Qatar, but in several other areas of the Arab world. And those two sides are having a very hard time signing a deal, because when they sign a deal, they admit that this phase of the war has ended. And there's a lot that goes into that, which we will cover in future episodes in greater depth. But what you need to understand here is the fact that Hamas is torn. They want to continue fighting. They want to hold on to the hostages as much as they can. And at the same time, they have no choice but to enter into an agreement because of US pressure, because of Israeli pressure, because of the fact that their people need a break from this ongoing war.
So thank you very much, Mati Shoshani, for bringing clarity to these very confusing reports. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development on this matter, so please keep spreading the truth, share, and follow us. And give us a click on the subscribe button if you haven't already, so that you'll never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. And speaking of boots on the ground, all over central Israel on Tuesday morning, alerts were activated following a ballistic missile launch from Yemen. The missile was successfully intercepted by the air defense systems, and no calls were received to the Magen David Adom Emergency Center. However, Israel's airspace was temporarily closed, and later on Tuesday, another ballistic missile was fired from Yemen towards Israel, but it crashed before it got anywhere close to the Israeli airspace, and no alerts were activated. This following Monday's strikes on military infrastructures of the Houthi terrorist regime at the port of Hodeidah. The IDF says that amongst the infrastructures that were attacked were engineering equipment that were meant to rehabilitate the port's infrastructure, fuel tanks, and vessels used for military activity and for exerting force against the State of Israel and against ships in the maritime area near this port, as well as additional terror infrastructures used by the Houthi terror regime. In light of the military use of this Hodeidah port by the Houthi terrorist regime, the port has been attacked by Israel several times in the past. And amongst other things, the port is used to transfer weapons to the Iranian regime, with whose help the forces of the Houthi terrorist regime execute terror schemes against the State of Israel and its allies. The IDF identified continued activities and attempts to rehabilitate the terrorist infrastructure in this port, and therefore the components that serve to promote the activity were attacked. So guys, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to spread the truth, and we invite you to continue and pray. Pray for our hostages that are held in the Gaza Strip by Hamas, that they'll be safe and that they'll come home soon. Continue to pray for the IDF soldier. Make it personal. pray for one soldier in need and his family, and pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Together, we will win this war.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.